And it's a good afternoon to Sportzfan Radio panel and very special guest today, Dr. Eric Windholz, Senior Lecturer at Monash University. Good afternoon, Dr. Windholz. Thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon, and it's definitely Eric.
Okay, Eric. Now, John, I know that you are all over transgender issues in sport, and you've particularly wanted Eric to come on the program today. I might turn it over to you to kick off the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Professor. Great to have two professors on the show today. Nice to see you, Eric, and thanks for coming along. Look, yes, it's a topic that we've been discussing. It would be years now about the whole transgender, intersex issue, and it really is starting to get to the pointy end. And we'll talk about Leah Thomas and other issues shortly. But look, just as a matter of a bit of a primer, Eric, could you just tell us what is intersex, what is transgender, and then we'll get into how they intersect with sport.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me on. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this issue. I don't think there's probably a more complex issue facing sport right now, and there's a lot of complex issues facing sport, so that says something. The issue around transgender intersex, I think you're right. I think it is helpful to just define what we're talking about. When we talk about transgender issues, we're talking about an incongruity or a disconnect between a person's biological sex or gender, their biological sexual characteristics, and the gender with which they identify. So a person who was born with male sexual characteristics but identifies as a female, or a person who's born with female sexual characteristics, I'm talking about biological characteristics, but then identifies as a male. Intersex is a person who has been born with an atypical set of male and female sexual characteristics, such that they aren't clearly male or clearly female. Sometimes that combination can be anatomical. They could have both female and male sexual organs. In other cases, and the one that really comes up in sport most often, is a person who was born with female sexual characteristics, anatomical organs, but has hormones, particularly testosterone hormone, at a male level. So they've got both female anatomical characteristics, but male hormone levels.
Eric, just on that, Caster Semenya is an athlete that we've followed. I'd have to say supported. And where does she fit in within that dichotomy you've just been speaking about?
Caster Semenya is an intersex person. She is born with, she was and still has female anatomical characteristics, but her testosterone level was elevated to male levels. And so she was a person who competed as a woman until suspicions were raised about her performance, about her appearance. She then went through the hormone testing, and her elevated male hormone levels were detected. An important thing to note, though, with Caster Semenya and intersex athletes, that their elevated testosterone levels is naturally occurring. There is no suggestion that they have taken any performance-enhancing drug, any substance to elevate their testosterone levels. It's naturally occurring, just as a 7-foot basketballer is 7 foot by nature, or you've got a huge wingspan, big hands. Nature confers on certain people certain traits different to the norm.
Eric, just on that, a great stat I like is that if you're a United States male between the age of 20 and 35 and you're over 7 foot tall, there's a 13% chance you're playing in the NBA right now. Yeah. So that's a natural advantage right there.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're all blessed with certain natural advantages. Some of us are blessed with height, the ability to pump blood through our body at faster rates that make us good athletes. Some of us, like Ian Thorpe, legendary, had webbed feet. But we don't say to people, because nature blessed you with something, you can't compete. We celebrate them when they compete, and Caster Semenya was no different. I think from what you said before, I'm also someone who's a firm Caster Semenya supporter. I think she has been treated appallingly for a naturally occurring advantage when we don't treat other people with naturally occurring advantages in the same way.
Just on Caster Semenya, we'll get to the transgender shortly, but in relation to just take Caster, because she's probably the exemplar. I think she's an incredibly good athlete. What is her natural advantage that she has?
I mean, the science will say that over short power distances, so I think, for her, it was distances of, if I remember correctly, less than a mile, or maybe it was less than 1,000 meters, that the higher testosterone levels gave her certain muscle mass, muscle strength advantages that over shorter power distance running distances, she had an unfair advantage.
Okay. Is it just testosterone, Eric, or is it other things? For instance, we hear about fast twitch muscles and other hormones. Is it just testosterone that's making the difference for her, or are there other advantages that she has?
As far as I'm aware, and based on the court decisions of the Court of Arbitration of Sport, it was all about testosterone.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, then that brings us to transgender. Tell me the issues there which impact on sport.
Okay, well, again, for the transgender athlete, it does come back to testosterone. Testosterone seems to be the key marker. And so you've got somebody, and the main issue we're talking about is transgender women. We are talking about men who transition to female. Yep. The opposite doesn't seem to be an issue. So maybe we can talk about that later. But yeah. So the issue is that, and I should say at the start, I'm not a scientist. I don't purport to be a scientist. But the scientific evidence there is, and I should again probably caveat by saying it's contested. Yep. And it's scant. The science on testosterone is like the science on climate change. There are people who deny it, there are people who swear by it, and everything in between. So the evidence, though, I think it's fair to say, establishes that at puberty, males gain certain physiological advantages because of their higher testosterone level, greater muscle strength, muscle mass. That they are on average, and again, this is all about averages, but they're on average bigger and stronger than their female counterparts when they go through puberty.
Yep. Before
puberty, it doesn't seem to be such an issue. A transgender athlete can take hormone suppression, testosterone suppression regimes, hormone therapy to try to lower their testosterone levels. The evidence on the impact of taking that hormone suppression therapy, again, is scant. The evidence does suggest that it does reduce muscle mass, it reduces bone density and other physical characteristics that come from testosterone. So there is evidence that it does reduce those things. But there seems to be a residual advantage. And the debate is how much does that residual advantage confer a competitive advantage in sports, and particularly in sports that require on power, speed, or involve combat collision.
Yep.
So that's really the issue. So how much of a residual advantage do these athletes retain once they go through the hormone therapy?
There's so much outrage, Eric, everywhere. And I'm not a social media person, but I understand on social media it's horrible out there. And as I understand, again, transgender athletes are just basically copying it from the trolls on social media. And it just seems to me to be incredibly unfair that there's scant, to use your word, scant evidence about the effects of testosterone reducing drugs. How much evidence is there out there that reducing testosterone is in any way a panacea?
Look, the evidence is scant, but it's building. Because this issue has become hot and topical, the evidence is building. There's a lot of researchers working in the area, but it's also scant because when we're dealing at the elite level, there are so few athletes who have transitioned at the elite level. So in a sense, the population base on which to do the studies are so few.
Yep.
And some people have referred to transgender athletes as the problem, as the solution, looking for a problem. I mean, there aren't that many athletes out there right now. So therefore, it's hard to get a robust scientific base when there are so few people, particularly at that elite level.
So the N number in any survey is going to be basically about the same people, because the sample is so small, and they're basically going to be researching the same people because there's so few transgender athletes who are actually competing in international sport. That's
correct. Yeah. I mean, obviously there are transgender athletes competing at the community level, but as a general rule, we don't put community level athletes through this problem. Community level sport is much more inclusive.
Eric, in terms of the actual process, we hear about, males who are transgender, who are transitioning to females. What does that actually involve?
Again, we're probably taking me to an area where I'm not the expert and I'm not involved. But if I go back in time, there used to be a point in time where people had to go through surgical changes. So they had to surgically have their anatomical organs altered.
Yep.
We have moved beyond that. And again, both different sports and different communities will set different barriers. I mean, we still have some countries where transitioning is illegal and it's not facilitated. So, there are different barriers. But today, a lot of communities will accept hormone therapy as a genuine demonstration or of a commitment to the lifestyle to which they're transitioning. But as a community, we also now have at certain places, in a sense, self-identification.
Yep.
People can say, I am now a trans woman or a trans man, change their clothes, change their appearance, live the lifestyle of that transitioning without actually going through any medical treatment. And there are many sections of society that will accept them as that. Sport has taken a position so far that self-identification is not sufficient.
Yep.
There needs to be some form of medical transition, but hormone therapy or testosterone suppression therapy is sufficient.
And I can just imagine that people don't live their lives through a sporting prism. They don't identify as a sports person necessarily. They identify as themselves, and being male, being female, that's part of it. But they identify as being Italian. They identify as being Croatian. They identify as being a scientist, a professor. There's a whole lot of ways that we identify as ourselves. It's a fairly dramatic change, or to be told by sport, well, if you want to play sport at a decent level, at the level that you want to play, you're going to have to do this radical readjustment of your hormonal makeup. For what? To be abused on social media and to be cast as an outlier by not only the sport, but other athletes within the sport. And I would think it's getting so difficult, in fact, horrible out there, that not many people would make that change.
John, let me make a couple of observations there, because I think you've hit the crux of the issue here. So let me just make a couple of observations. First of all, you're right. It is a huge lifestyle change and quite a traumatic change for somebody to go through. I have not seen not even an iota of evidence that anyone is going through this change to gain a competitive advantage in the sport that they're choosing. They're doing this for lifestyle reasons, and sport is part of their lifestyle. But no one is doing this in order to get a competitive advantage. Well, I've seen no evidence whatsoever. The second point you talk about is the difficulty of the transition, the reception that they receive in the community. You've talked about the tone of the social media debate. The only thing, and it's there, and I absolutely accept that. The only thing I will say is that those people who query the circumstances in which trans athletes should be able to compete in sport also cop a fair bit of harassment and flack. There is a very strong pro-trans community that seek to, that can be very aggressive in challenging anyone who questions the place of trans athletes in sport. And I have seen academics attacked as well for suggesting or supporting sporting policies that place hurdles in their way. So what I think we have is, as we do in any incredibly emotive debate, is that we often have people talking at each other, talking past each other, but not talking to each other. And the only point I want to make is I think we see that on both sides. But the issue is, on this debate, yes, these people are making an incredibly difficult and brave personal lifestyle choice, but it does have impacts on other people. If we accept that there is a residual competitive advantage, then we need to have a debate about the athletes against whom they're competing, for whom this competitive advantage, in their eyes, changes the playing field.
Eric, you're one of the few academics I've seen who had the guts to put your toe in the water of these very murky waters. And I think your view is that we have to pay more attention to the work health and safety laws. You wrote a recent article, I think December 2020, which has had some publicity. Is that your view, that that's where we should be heading?
Well, the article I wrote that you referred to was in response to World Rugby. World Rugby came out with a policy for transgender athletes at the elite level that imposed a blanket ban on trans women athletes, and it justified it primarily on health and safety issues. And that was the first time that I had seen a policy so directly justify an exclusion on health and safety issues, and that triggered me to get involved in this debate, because my interest in sport is largely around health and safety. So if you look at the two justifications that are imposed on or are put forward to justify somehow excluding or restricting transgender athletes from participating in sport, one is the competitive advantage or the unfair competitive advantage they pose, particularly to women's sport, and they threaten the integrity of women's sport. And the other is health and safety, that because of the physiological and physical advantages that men generally have over women that cannot be completely reversed by hormone replacement or hormone suppression therapy, that trans women pose a physical threat to cisgender, non-trans women.
Yep. And
my point there is any health and safety risk doesn't arise because of the gender or the gender identity of the athlete. It arises because of a disparity in strength and size and physique. And I'm in Melbourne. We're an AFL town. I remember the photos of the Fremantle ruckman Laurie Sandilands standing next to the Western Bulldogs player Caleb Daniels. I mean, if Sandilands fell on Daniels, he'd be hurt. So yeah, we have physical health and safety risks in sport, regardless of transgender. So I actually thought the health and safety argument, quite frankly, was a furphy. Because if we're going to say that size disparities create a health and safety risk, then we should deal with that risk regardless of the gender identity of the athlete. And I actually thought World Rugby were getting on very slippery slope.
Yep.
If they were going to start to say we have to control participants in our sport at the senior level. We do it at the junior level all the time. We have age restrictions. Some sports have weight restrictions. But if we're going to do it at the elite level, I just thought that they were creating a very, very slippery slope.
Eric, a sport where workplace health and safety cannot play a role, swimming. And we've got the situation with Leah Thomas in America, a possibility of getting into the Olympics. Could you just explain to us about that case?
Okay, so Leah Thomas was born male and competed at the college level as a male swimmer, has transitioned and is now a trans woman, now competing at the college level in America and competing quite successfully. She set records at the US collegiate level as a woman and is now vying for Olympic selection. And so her presence has sharpened everybody's focus on the transgender issue in swimming. And, and for her, this is a life dream to compete to the best of her ability in her chosen sport, in the identity, the gender identity that she is. But we've also had the cisgender, the non-trans athletes against whom she is potentially competing, raising, and I think justifiable concerns, in the sense of concerns that we should take seriously and we should work through. And, so we've had, swimmers of the caliber of Emma McKeon and Ariana Titmuss, against whom Leah Thomas might compete, saying we support inclusion. We don't want to exclude transgender athletes, but at the same time, we're looking for fairness. And basically saying we are putting our trust in FINA. They're putting their trust in the International Swimming Federation, FINA, and trusting them to come up with a set of rules that will be fair. Eric, and FINA will be meeting very shortly
today, I believe,
this very issue.
Well, talk about being topical on the issue. Eric, the FINA will be meeting today, and apparently they are going to make a decision, which I find fairly extraordinary when you look at who's going to be making the decision. And they talk about sports scientists, lawyers, and then they talk about the heads of their sporting federations. Now, we've just had the AFL, heads of the AFL trying to agree on anything in the last few days, and they can't agree on anything. I would be amazed if, I think it's 190 countries or something in FINA who are going to vote on this issue. It's reported that there are three possibilities: allow transgender athletes to compete, allow them to compete with those hormonal reductions that we've spoken about, apparently not as savage as has been the case, but nevertheless. And thirdly, to have their own competition, to have a transgender competition. Now, we won't be able to predict the future, but do you have any thoughts, A, how it will pan out, but B, whether they are viable, the only three viable options?
The fourth option is excluding them in total. That's the fourth option. And so I don't think that's a viable option. The third option you mentioned about having their own competition, I don't think that's a viable option, and I don't think it's an appropriate option either. I don't think it's viable because there aren't that many competing at the international level. I don't know who Leah Thomas would compete against if we just had an international competition for trans athletes. So I just don't think that's viable, nor do I think it's appropriate that we should treat them as completely separate in that manner.
Personally, I find it horrible, Eric. And you just imagine what will happen if that becomes the outcome.
Yeah, we have a separate competition for para athletes. And so people are trying to draw an analogy between being transgender and being a para athlete. And as I said, I think it's an appalling analogy.
Yep.
And one that I don't support in any way. Most sports have opted for the second option, setting some kind of testosterone level that has to be maintained over a certain period of time for the athlete to be eligible to compete in the competition of the gender to which they associate. That seems to be the most common approach. What I think is interesting, though, is in November last year, the International Olympic Committee issued a new policy, a new framework, and they called it the Fairness Non-Discrimination Framework. And what they said to their member federations, and basically all Olympic sports, they was talking to all Olympic sports, they were saying, we want to reverse the paradigm. The paradigm is that we include transgender athletes unless the science proves that there is a performance enhancing advantage. So the presumption is inclusion unless the science says there is a clear basis to exclude, and we can clearly and scientifically justify the testosterone levels on which they're being excluded. And I think that will have a very significant impact on how a lot of sports deal with it.
Eric, thank you for that. It'll be fascinating to see what the decision is of FINA, if it is in fact made. And I'm wondering, Eric, if it be possible, we could get you back another day to talk about this decision and to see what the ramifications are, because whatever FINA does is not going to be the end of it. That won't solve rugby's problem, it won't solve the AFL's problem, it won't solve a lot of sports problems. It'll really only solve FINA's problem, and I suspect it'll only add to their problem. So if it was okay with you, Eric, we'd like to get you back to talk about this because I've got to say it's a fascinating issue, one that we've covered for some time, and it's starting to become a lot more important as the next Olympics approaches.
Well, first of all, the answer is a simple yes. I'd love it. I've enjoyed this. As I said at the start, it's a complex issue. I don't think there is a more complex issue, and it's one that's going to continue to evolve. And I think it will probably be dealt with in an iterative basis. As each sport develops their policy, every other sport looks at it. They look at how it's received, how it works, and there'll be this iterative process of change and evolution as we as a society grapple with this issue across a whole range of fronts. Sport's not unique. All the issues sport deals with are sports that we as a society deal with holistically. Racism, drugs, sexuality.
Yep.
And as we as a society learn how to deal with it, I think sports will be part of that journey.
Thanks again, Eric.
That's a pleasure.
Thanks very much, Eric. I echo the judge's sentiments. A terrific discussion today, and I think for our viewers, certainly explains a lot that they may not have already considered, and we'd just love to have you on again very soon.
Well, that would be a pleasure. I've enjoyed it, and I hope it's a small contribution to an important debate.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Cheers.
All right. A very patient Paul Dalligan. I haven't heard anything from you today, Paul. That's very interesting as far as I'm concerned. But one thing I've got to ask you, Paul, last week, the Bulldogs playing the Eels. Who would have thought 34-4 would be the scoreline? And then compare that to last night's match where the Eels put in 26 against the Roosters 16. Bookies would be amazed at those two results. Certainly, there might be a few triple-aways made some money out of the Bulldogs last week.
Well, I'll tell you who's happy. The boys at Sportsbet. Someone had a $10 multi. We talk about our parlays. The payoff for you, $1 million. $1 million would have been all he needed. Was the Eels to win by 13 plus. I thought they'd win by 33 plus the way the Dogs have been going. But I did notice as well, Phil Gould changed his profile picture to have that final score there. So that's a bit different to the wife and the tin lids behind you in the profile photo. But that's Phil Gould's Facebook profile, I think. So he was obviously very happy with the outcome. And, Professor, I don't want to jump ahead, but your Dogs, can you believe it, are favourites today. Now, we wouldn't have been saying that too long ago.
No, we would not, Paul. Just when you saw that scoreline last week, what were your thoughts?
Well, if I was watching the game and had it as the last leg, I might have been thinking I'd rather sit through one of those Saw movies. There will be in it with the chainsaw, but lucky that wasn't me. So I was impressed. So I hate seeing basket cases in any sport. And there's so much talent at your team there. You had quite a few great stories there. You've got Addo-Carr pushing for an almost certain recall. And that's the sort of attitude you want, is when someone's overlooked for State of Origin, you don't want them sooking in the corner. You want them out there finding their best. And it may even be a masterstroke from Brad Fittler if he gets Addo-Carr back for game 2 in Perth on Wednesday week, and Addo-Carr fires, because I think he scored 5 tries since those admissions in two games, which is very impressive, particularly given that the Dogs' halves weren't firing as well. Matt Burton is playing so well that he's pushing for that utility role in the Blues team, and I'd love to see it happen.
All right, Paul, let's start with last night's match. The Eels, the game was almost over at halftime, 26-12. Brad Arthur said he was very frustrated because when he was asked how could the team possibly win after the week before's performance, he said he was frustrated. They need to bring that type of commitment every week.
Yeah, they've played quite well. I mean, it wasn't a bad game, actually. The first half was brilliant football, and the Roosters had some more injuries. The Roosters had two blokes from the one family with the concussion protocols. So sending out our thoughts to that family, the Butcher family. It was tough for the Roosters. They're missing Luke Keary, who's their general. He could be forced out of the game completely because he's had so many concussions, and that has led to speculation the Roosters might be pursuing Cameron Munster of the Storm, who would have to be on any marker the best player in the game at the moment. So one thing about the Roosters, I'm not saying there's anything untoward going on, but when they want their man, they often get their man, or generally get their man. So I would be very interested to watch this space about Cameron Munster and possibly popping up at the Storm. At the Roosters. On that note, Wayne Bennett, who we often talk about, has missed out on yet another high-profile signing, Ryan Madison from the Eels. He's in top form, playing for New South Wales. I'd heard it was a done deal, so something's happened there that the Eels have bumped up the offer, and that sort of shows that Wayne Bennett is struggling to get players up there to the Redcliffe Dolphins.
Thursday night, Paul, was not a night that you would have wanted circled on your calendar. Kevin, have you heard from Kevin Yap? Because the Dragons put 32 past your Bunnies.
No, I even heard a girl I went to school with, I haven't heard from for quite a while. So even she was launching in to the Rabbit Stew. So I was lucky I was working late that night. I didn't see the game. and you'd think I did it intentionally, but it was a massacre. I've seen Pinatas get off lighter than the Rabbitohs did in the first 20 minutes. We were so bad that our replacement for Adam Reynolds, Lachlan Ilias, was hooked. Not injured, taken off. Now that's copped a lot of backlash because you've got to stick with your players. You can't just pull them. It's not like you can give them a rest and get them back out there. What that will do to his self-confidence, who knows? But there have been a few players who've bounced back. Chad Townsend at the Sharks, the year they won the comp, he was benched in the final, if you don't mind, in a preliminary final, and bounced back and got his confidence back and won the grand final with the Sharks. So Lachlan Ilias would be in a bad headspace at the moment when he's pulled off after 20 minutes.
Well, the coach of the Dragons said it was the best half of footy for the season, and at 32-0, he's probably right. Your coach Paul said, and he's probably quite right here, in 20 minutes they had 12 sets to 1. So how do you expect to score?
Yeah, he wasn't a happy man when pressed on the Ilias, because he said it wasn't just his fault, and a journalist quite, couldn't see the stare coming his way, but he pressed with the question as, why'd you just take him off then? And he wasn't up for that at all, the South coach. But that was a shocking display. To see the Rabbitohs, though, if you look at the odds, and we do that regularly, we've dropped down to 29-1 to win the comp. This is a team that was in the grand final last year, the Rabbitohs, so there's clearly issues there. We might not even make the 8 at this rate. And I'll tell you who's feeling worse, though, is Schooner. I mean, he would have gone to the bar to order a Schooner when Manly was up, and they let in something like 16 points in about 4 minutes, I think. So I've seen longer ad breaks than it took the time for the Cowboys to get 3 tries on. So Schooner would be feeling devastated. At home, that wouldn't have happened previously, and it also wouldn't have happened with previous versions of the Cowboys. So not surprisingly, they're into third favourites to win the comp, the Cowboys. They're playing some amazing football, and it's good to watch.
Well, if ever there was an advertisement for rugby league, Paul, it'd be that last 7 minutes of that match, because, as you said, Manly led 26-12. The game was all over. All they had to do was keep possession of the ball. They never got the ball back. North Queensland scored 16 points in 7 minutes.
Well, I tell you what, they call it the Peninsula, Manly, and it's sponsored by 4 Pines. I hope the beer wasn't served in glass bottles, because there might have been a few of them raining down onto the field. There would have been some very unhappy fans there. I've been to that stadium, and it's not fun being in a South jersey, I can tell you. So they wouldn't have been happy there at Manly at all. Neither should they be. And I think that shows that Manly probably won't make the 8 this year with all the talent they've got. I tip them to win it all, I don't mind saying.
Now, Des Hasler has nearly as good a turn of phrase as you, Paul. His press conference, he said, we were the better side for 72 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. Who was that golfer that said, I'm hitting the ball really well, but it's just not going in the hole?
Well, that's like Greg Chappell. He said, I'm playing good cricket. I just keep getting out.
Not as good as Greg Norman, though. I'd like to thank my parents, especially my mother and my father. I don't know if that was about the Saudi golf tour, but he'd like to thank the Saudi sheikhs there. But anyway, that's it's Des Hasler would be just really struggling at the moment. He has so much talent. He's been without his best player. But I've got to point to the Brisbane Broncos, who've been without their best player, Adam Reynolds, a bit recently. They were valiant against the Storm, and it took a masterclass from that man again, Cameron Munster, who is the best player in the game. I'll have to say it again. He is looking Wally Lewis-like, and that is not a compliment that is thrown around often. He is that good that he will probably take the Storm to a title on his own. Well, not just on his own, but I think that the way he's playing, it's a one-man show at the moment with the Storm. He had some great support from Jerome Hughes, but the Broncos probably would have won that game, but for Cameron Munster turning on the magician show. I mean, I've seen David Copperfield in Vegas, and he didn't have as many magic tricks as what Munster's showing at the moment.
Well, they were down 16-6 just before half-time, the Storm, Paul, and certainly the masterclass started. I think the Storm players were probably going to be a bit wary of going into the sheds and having their coach eyeballing them, because they scored 10 points very, very quickly. So they went in at 16-16 at half-time, and when they came out, they did exactly the same thing. So they put the game away. There was a late consolation try to the Broncos, but it seemed like a fairly comfortable win to the Storm in the end.
What Munster's doing, you can have your doves flying out of a hat and cutting women in half, but this is a man who's making world-class defenders look like imbeciles. He doesn't seem to know what he's doing. He's even admitted he doesn't know what he's doing. So it is one of the best levels of football I've ever seen since Wally Lewis, which is as high as you can put it. And Andrew Johns level, it's uncanny and freakish what he's managing to do out there. And he really could take the Storm all the way to the grand final.
The Titans would have thought that they were in for a possible win and an upset against the Sharks at halftime when it was 10-all, but the Sharks put in a better second half and the Titans fell away, which seems to be the tale of the season for them, Paul.
When you talk about advertisements for football, that game, I did watch that game, and I won't get that 2 hours of my life back. It wasn't the world's best game. It had more errors than you'd see. Just Benny Hill stuff, a lot of it. It was just drop balls galore. Sharks just got it done, though, and they ground it out, but it wasn't exciting to watch. The Titans are one of the bigger disappointments of the year, as are the Knights. And that's a warning to this hot new young coach that everyone's shipping around, Cameron Ciraldo, who's the assistant coach at the Panthers. I'm sure that the coaches at the Titans and the Knights, well, they were good assistant coaches, but they're realising how tough it is to be thrown in, as is Trent Barrett, or was Trent Barrett. Trent Barrett's head coaching career could be over. And that's what the warning is to this Cameron Ciraldo, who everyone's got to coach the Tigers. He's got to coach the Bulldogs. He's being talked about as coaching everywhere. But he'd want to be careful whether he stays for a while and gets sharper at being an assistant, or whether he's ready to jump into one of those teams which might not be on the up.
Well, you talk about the Panthers. They were in a canter against the Warriors, and the Professor's parlay did not suffer from last leg syndrome. Very astutely picked the Panthers yesterday, Paul, 40-6. Yep. The Warriors last game at Redcliffe, although they'll still be training from there, but they'd be welcoming getting back to Eden Park to play.
Well, they talk about coaching merry-go round. F-bomb Michael Maguire could be popping up the Warriors, so I can't make sense of it. He might be what they need, though. He's pretty tough on the discipline. The Warriors have just been a terrible team, and the Panthers look unstoppable, and the only one that could stop them, I think, is the Storm. It's almost a two-horse race. I'm not quite ready for my annual prediction on who will win the comp, but for Munster's form, I'd give it to Penrith now.
Are you willing to say yet that St George will finish higher than the Rabbitohs?
No, the bet with my friend is the Dragons and the Sharks, and I said the Sharks, and it's a steak dinner. So I'm going to fly up to Rockville up there for our friend in Sydney, and I might even get some mushroom sauce and some spuds on the side at $28, probably the spuds. But Yeah, that's the bet. So I'm feeling pretty confident that the Sharks will finish above the Dragons. I'll order the steak now.
But will the Rabbitohs finish above the Dragons?
Next question. I'll do a Paul Keating. You could ask me that, but let me say this. The next game...
the next game is today. The Raiders and the Knights, Paul. The Knights been exceptionally disappointing this season. The Raiders really need to win this one if they've got any hopes left of finishing in the 8th. Playing at Bruce Stadium, it'll be about -2 there today. Who do you think will win that one and why?
-2 if they've got those heaters on the sidelines. That's the only way to get to that high. I think the Raiders will win that. The Knights have been inept. They almost need a sponsorship from Viagra, I think, to be any chance. They've really been bad. The Knights. They used to be sponsored by Henny Penny Chicken. They just need something in their Tucker Bowl. There's really a problem there at the Knights, and it is a shame because I thought that they'd get there. What is a positive thing though? The crowds still keep turning up, and I love that city, and I love their passion for rugby league. They're still getting the crowds by rugby league size. They still keep faith in their team, and they deserve better than what they're seeing. The issue might be Jack Whiten's out for the Raiders. That's the only thing that might give the Knights some sort of chance. He's out with COVID protocols, which will affect the New South Wales team makeup enormously because he was one of the few good players in game 1. Brad Fittler copped a lot of stick for playing him out of position, but class is class. And Jack Whiten, I may have invested on that, did score the first try for the Blues. That was one of the few positives on the night. I still think the Raiders will win today, though.
And final score?
22-10, I think, down there at freezing cold Bruce Stadium. Just be grateful you're not a sideline reporter there today.
And the final game for the round, my Bulldogs playing another disappointing side, West Tigers, who both the battle of the sack coaches teams.
Well, I know we love both sports. You've just got to watch it closely if you haven't been already. Matt Burton, the way he kicks the ball, has seasoned commentators saying he's one of the best kicks of the ball ever. Now, I know that when I think it was, who was the guy from Darren Bennett, was it, from AFL?
Yes.
That when he first went to the NFL, he kicked the ball with a different spiral, that they used the 2 tyres, to fire the ball in the air. They couldn't replicate the way that his kicks landed. And he was the first to bring that style of kicking to the NFL. And if you can make the guy drop it, as we know in NFL, it's pretty important. Matt Burton could have an enormous career in the NFL. The way that he kicks the ball that high, it almost comes down with snow on it. It's particularly if he's playing at Canberra. So I think that he could be the difference today for the Dogs. Addo-Carr to go for his few tries as well. And I think your Dogs will win today. Scares me a bit that your favourite, so I didn't think I'd say that even a week ago.
And final score?
I'll go for 28-14 to the Dogs there. But well worth watching Burton and Addo-Carr. I'm hoping that they both get into the Blues side because their form, even at what's been a pretty bad team, I think should get them into the Blues squad. We need something to happen, and it's great for rugby league. I don't know whether I would have scheduled a game in Perth, but they did need a neutral venue. We sadly missed out on our Melbourne trip, Melbourne game. But it's good for the rugby league fans in Perth that they get game 2. It doesn't really matter where it's played because the TV ratings, as I predicted, were monster. It's one of the highest rating shows of the year and will be.
So as far as your Blues are concerned, Paul, who would you be bringing into that side?
Well, it's a tough one. As I said, I'd be bringing Burton back and you get the Jake Trbojevic back as well, and Matt Burton and Addo-Carr. So they're 3 that I'd be bringing in. The problem we've got is a few injuries as well. I'd even consider, as much as I like Damien Cook, Api Carousel is the hooker that works so well with Nathan Cleary at the Panthers. Just put all the Panthers in. Just pick anyone who plays for the Panthers who's from New South Wales. just put them in, and everyone else can wait outside. That's almost how it's looking.
Paul, can I just say that great to see you're rocking the 1970s look with that shirt. It's very John Farnham of 1978. But it brings me to sort of those thinking.
I've never been a Whispering Jack, though. Sorry.
Absolutely. But the good old days when we used to sneer at all the rugby league off-field stuff. But Now that's the other way. The AFL, you've got DeGoey, you've got Smith, you've got May from Melbourne, and the NRL players, there's nothing. What's going on? They seem to be behaving themselves.
Well, would you want to front up to Peter V'landis as your headmaster? It wouldn't be just detention you'd be on. I tell you, might be out of the game. So he'd stare you down. I'm actually quite happy because we used to have a joke, didn't we, about the off-field stakes, and now we need the during the season stakes. You know, as it used to be in the off-season when all the antics were. I don't know why does the AFL players all seem to be coming out in not in that way, but in a lunatic way. I'm not sure. This is a tribute to the Elvis movie. This one, I'm going to see it soon.
It's so true.
No, I'm proud that the game is going really well. We've cut down on a lot of that. I haven't heard of too much nonsense from the league players. Perhaps they're just getting their games in order. There's an enormous amount of money around. A lot of the players are playing for their futures. Cameron Munster is an amazing redemption story. He's gone from dancing around with a bag of an unknown white substance. I still don't think they know what it was, but he's now got a partner and a baby. He's not drinking anymore, and it's no coincidence that he's playing the best football that many have seen since Wally Lewis. Yeah. And I love the story, and we're seeing that Craig Bellamy was ready to tear his contract up, as he was with Brandon Smith, who said he wants to win a premiership in the Roosters jersey while he was playing he is still playing for the Storm. So Craig Bellamy perhaps would have been a bit more old school and just ripping contracts up. But I do like redemption stories, and Cameron Munster is Exhibit A for the rugby league game and season this year.
Just on John's question, Paul, do you think it's got something to do with the zero tolerance edict that was passed? And if there's anything at all, then you're automatically suspended regardless of whether you're guilty or not?
Well, I think that Jack de Belin was charged with some horrendous crimes, and he was stood down, and now he's cleared of those crimes, but he missed a season pretty much. So I think the players know that any indiscretions, whereas in the AFL side of things, you simply have to say you've got mental health issues, and you pretty much are under a cloud of secrecy. So the NRL players don't have that luxury, and they've seen the way that Cameron Munster would have got around. His career was almost over. I mean, he might have ended up somewhere, but would have kept struggling. I think they've seen stories like that and realised how significant it can be if you do behave like a goose. And they are professional. They're being paid well, and they want to be on their best behaviour. So I'm not sure whether there's some why in the AFL that still seems that they can carry on like that. It is an interesting question. I hadn't thought of it recently, a comparison of who's travelling worse. But I wonder why there is that feeling in the AFL amongst the players that they can carry on like that. The rugby league players' professionalism, I've never seen it higher.
All right, Paul, thanks for that. Look forward to talking with you again with respect to rugby league next Sunday. Judge, we might finish on the headline just this last week about Netball Australia, and they're being on as the headline said, brink of collapse. What does that do for your thoughts about AFLW throwing their lot in with Netball Australia?
It's a massive story, Professor. And I gotta say, I think it surprised everybody that netball was going so badly. I mean, $4 million loss in a competition that doesn't have that much money floating around, where we hear that the players are taking something like 95% of the broadcast rights and salary. It's got mud written all over it. Yeah, you're right. You'd have to wonder about how it will go with AFLW. But netball basically has to stand on its own 2 feet. It's got a few problems. I see that the AFL is saying that they might get some more franchises into netball. I think that would be a mistake. I see that Bridget McKenzie, the ex-sports minister, without approval of the board, just loaded in $2 million. Whenever I hear Bridget McKenzie getting herself involved in sport, I think, look out here. The sport's in serious trouble, Professor, and they're the ones that have to bring itself out of the problems, it seems to me.
It's similar to me to soccer, that there's so many kids play soccer, but then they don't transition through to the sport. I mean, how many girls play netball, and yet it doesn't seem to be transitioning through that support to the adult competitive level?
Interesting, Paul, because what they're talking, I'm just going by the paper, so I'm not saying it's true, but they're having a crisis meeting this week, and of their strategies, that's one is to get more people playing. I don't think that's a problem. I don't think the game could be a lot more popular than what it is. To me, I think it's the most popular women's game, certainly in Australia, and I always thought it's the best run. And you look at any local competition, it's very well run. That's not the problem. The problem is the elite area. And it seems to me that it has the wrong people, just like the AFL Commission. They've got the wrong people who are looking into it.
It's not as if, too, like basketball's got no free-to-wear much has at all, Professor, but it probably even has more free-to-wear coverage than basketball. Is that right, Professor, you think?
Yeah, it does. It does.
And so there must be sponsors. I mean, there must be someone paying for those ads. And that money, I think it's got to come down to the players' 95% of the salaries, I presume. That's got to be it.
Well, I think the problem is, as I read it, that when Netball Australia was playing in the New Zealand, the Trans-Tasman tournament, that Netball Australia received $3 million as broadcast rights for participating in that competition. When Netball Australia exited that competition and they negotiated rights, and I think it's with Channel 9, there were no broadcast rights. The deal that Channel 9 put to them was, okay, we'll sell the advertising, we'll keep half, you can have half. That was it. So it's a bad deal. And of course, doesn't make up anywhere near the 3 million they were already getting. So you've already got a 3 million hole in your budget. And Netball Australia have reportedly lost 7.2 million over the last 2 years. Judge, I was interested in your comment. AFL clubs getting more netball franchises you thought was a mistake. A mistake for the AFL clubs or a mistake for Netball Australia?
Yeah, I think netball's future is on its own. I said this before, Professor. I thought several years ago that netball and the AFL elite competition ought to break away as some kind of super league. That hasn't happened, and I won't retraverse that. But no, I think netball's future is with netball, and to tie itself in with the AFL, particularly with I think is quite a mess coming for the AFL with the broadcast rights, with Gil McLachlan going, with the AFL not understanding they've got a problem with women. There's a whole heap of issues. I think that the netball ought to dissociate itself from the AFL. What troubles me, Professor, is that all of these problems of these major sports is really funneling into broadcasting. The AFL depends upon a huge broadcasting deal. Netball needs a huge broadcasting deal. Absent that, grassroots AFL is going fantastic. Grassroots netball is going fantastic. It's just when it gets up into these higher echelons that we're getting these problems. I'm not sure, Paul, whether rugby's got the same problem, whether it basically depends upon a huge broadcasting deal.
I was going to say one door the ladies shouldn't knock on is Saudi Arabia. I don't think they'll be throwing any money around for the women. But no, so rugby union has faced similar issues. That's been close to it. What keeps rugby union alive is the international games, because no one really cares about Super 12, Super 15, whatever it is. It's big in New Zealand now, but it's gone the way almost of the Big Bash League in terms of people's interest in the game. And even your big matches, your Waratahs and Reds and Waratahs and Brumbies, I don't know many people that get that excited about those games anymore. So rugby union has an enormous corporate backing, but just doesn't seem... I wonder, though, about netball. If it's on free-to-air and women and men are watching, why aren't advertisers lining up to sponsor it and pay accordingly if the ratings are there? So if people aren't watching the game, then it is going to be in trouble. But if they're watching the game, where's the advertising?
And it's fairly small beer, Professor. 4 million, 3 million. I mean, okay, it's a lot of money in the sense that they can't be sustained. But gee, if they can't get sponsors and broadcast deals well and truly cover those losses. There's something screwy going on. As I say, it's probably the most popular women's game in Australia, a sporting mad nation.
Well, here's a question for both of you. In a background where clubs and leagues everywhere are getting out of gambling sponsorship, the Netball Australia CEO has said they're open to accepting gambling sponsorships, and it's not out of the realms of possibility. Now, you would see how much trouble they're in when they're going to gambling to try and prop up the sport.
I hadn't heard that, Professor. That's I would have thought a retrograde step, and it's also inimical to the culture of netball. I think netball's got a fantastic persona. The optics look fantastic for the young girls, young women.
Wholesome, wholesome. You could use the word
that's
wholesome.
The word wholesome. It's a very wholesome sport, and you throw gambling into that, you can crush that culture overnight. Don't like it.
Your thoughts, Paul?
You've got to stay away from that. They might as well put tobacco on the front there. Getting the menthol cigarettes advertised for the ladies. No, they've got to stay away from that. But it does show they're in real issues. So I've got to wonder where the sponsorship is if people are watching the game. That would have to be the secret. The advertising revenue's got to be prioritised over the sponsorship revenue. You'd have to think.
And just on that, Paul, you'd think that the sponsors would be flocking to netball because of its wholesome attraction. It's women, great characters, play the game in a great attitude. I just couldn't think of a better sport for sponsors, to be honest. And way ahead, I would have thought of the aforesaid AFL and their problems.
And they always say women have the buying power in the households, or the majority of households. So I'm wondering why your Kellogg's and Uncle Toby's, sponsors like that aren't flocking to it. I mean, Uncle Toby's perfect sponsorship for the Ironman, healthy breakfast and get up there and run with your surfboard through the waves, that sort of sponsorship. Where is that for netball? There must be some help needed on the corporate side to get those advertisers in, because it is a great product. And as far as I'm aware, it's close competition.
Well, I think one of the problems, John, is if you see a quote attributed to the Netball Australia CEO, she said, netball is a business. We need to start thinking with that mindset. The problem I have with that comment is the word start.
That's right. Wake up and smell the rose has been a business for a long time. Gee,
I read a bit about her. She makes Peter V'landys look collaborative, apparently. She might be a bit of a fire from the hip type.
I didn't know, Paul, they introduced that super goal rule without speaking to the grassroots. They just brought it in. So here we go. We just have the super goal.
Similar to what rugby league did with the one umpire. They just said, boys, we're going from 2 to 1. just over one meeting over Zoom. So that can happen.
Well, yeah. I think it's a watch. Space. I think it's a watch this space, gentlemen. All right, we might finish with Gelding's tips. I hope you've got your sharpened pencil there, Paul.
I'll be at a play centre with the kids, but I'll try and get something on.
Warrnambool, race 4, horse 2, Yulong Place, and Warrnambool, race 7, horse 1, shock and awe. And if that one gets up, we'll all be in shock and awe.
Yeah.
Now, I know Paul wasn't on the show for the whole program today. Judge, how many zingers?
He got 8 today. Not bad. Not bad from a very slow start.
8 in half a program. Well done, Paul.
I hope the Whispering Jack one got in there.
No, actually, his shirt got its own zinger. It's so funny. No, but you set the bar very high for fashions on the field.
It's a diesel shirt, actually, with Japanese writing. It's harder to read than a Chinese newspaper, but it's got all these words all over.
He got his 9th one in before the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, gentlemen, thanks very much for today. And until next Sunday, it's a very good afternoon to you all.
Thanks, boys.